Welcome to Gen Z Hoops, the Gen Z basketball, coaching, and sports business show. On this podcast, you'll learn from professional players, coaches, and executives from all over the world and see the court in a brand new way. And now, joining you courtside, your Gen Z host, John Hartofilis.
Hey, Josh, what's going on?
How you doing, John? Good to be. Good to see you. Good to be on.
I'm doing great. Really excited to have you on, and it's definitely been a lot of fun. Communicating with you over the last few weeks, everything you've been up to. I'm finally getting you on the show. It's definitely been a lot of fun jumping into all the cool stuff you've been doing. I mean, there's obviously a lot, right? With your career, you've been to a lot of different places, a lot of cool stops. The one thing I definitely want to jump in first, maybe where that passion kind of started for you. Obviously, maybe you probably all get asked about your professional career. I'm curious maybe about the high school and college experience that really made you fall in love with the game and know that basketball is what you're going to do for the rest of your life.
I mean, I knew it back when I started playing basketball when I was 5, that was what I wanted to do. You know, when I was growing up, there was always two things I wanted to do. I either wanted to be a police officer or a professional basketball player. And it just so happened that I was lucky enough to actually get the chance to be a professional basketball player. I played multiple sports when I was growing up. I played baseball when I was younger, soccer when I was younger. But football and basketball were my two main sports. I played football in high school as well. But as of my junior year, my basketball coach kind of told me, you're not playing football anymore. So that was the end of my football career. You know, it would have been interesting to see where I would have gone had I been able to continue to play football. But, you know, I think it worked out pretty well for me.
I definitely wouldn't argue with that. I mean, and thinking about maybe even like your early career, I saw one thing. It's when you went, I think at West Nottingham, you averaged 28, 16, and 9.7. I think we can call that averaging a triple double. I would round up that 9.7. If it was 9.6, you know, anything lower, maybe not. I would say you averaged triple double with blocks. So definitely, right, it worked out well for you, even at those early years, right, dominating at those lower levels. What did it look like maybe committing to go to UConn and seeing yourself maybe as a Husky before going there, and once you're going there, right, winning a national championship, experiencing all those awesome things?
You know, it was a lower level and then it was high school, but we were still playing against some of the top prep school teams in all of the country. You know, we were playing against the Laurenburgs, the Hargraves, the National Christians down in DC. We were playing against some very good competition, and we weren't quite as good as most of those teams, but we were still good enough to be, I think we were somewhere in the bottom of the top 25 in the country at one point. I think we were like in the 20s. So, you know, I still call that a win. Yeah, it was definitely a triple double, by the way. That counts as a triple double. There's no question in my mind. Yeah, you know, going to UConn when I was coming out of prep school. Well, initially when I was coming out of high school, I had several schools interested in me, but most of the bigger schools wanted me to do a prep year. They either wanted me a redshirt or they wanted me to do a prep year. You know, really any of the high majors wanted me to do that. I think St. Joe's was really the only one that I would consider close to a high major that didn't want me to do a prep year or a redshirt year. So I decided to do the prep route. And while I was there, I obviously got interest from a bunch of schools. At the end of the day, you know, there were probably 6 or 7 schools that were in my kind of final lists. Georgetown was there, Rutgers was there, St. Joe's was there, UVA came in late, Carolina came in late. But really, my choice was between UConn and Kansas. And it was a choice between either Roy Williams or Jim Calhoun. You know, both of them Hall of Fame coaches, some of the best to ever do it. And I tell you, it was very difficult for me to say no to Roy Williams. I remember he came and visited our school. He came on campus and watched our practice and then met with me after the practice. And I remember we sat down in the little conference room that we had at the prep school, and he had a stack of papers in his hands, and he put the stack of papers in the middle of the table. And he was like, look, these are scholarship papers right here. You don't have to sign them, but they're here if you want them. And then he proceeded to, you know, basically sell me on the University of Kansas for probably about the next 45 minutes, I would say. And I'll be damned if I didn't really want to sign those papers at the end of that meeting. But at that time, I had a visit scheduled to go to Connecticut. And I knew that those were, you know, really the two main schools in my mind at that point. So I was like, you know what, let me hold off. Let me go to UConn, take this visit and see how I feel about it after that. I took the visit to UConn, and I think within a couple of days, I committed to the University of Connecticut. You know, ultimately it came down to, you know, there was a lot of similarities between the two. Great coach, great program, both of them known for putting guys into the NBA. At the end of the day, it came down to Emeka Okafor and getting the chance to play alongside of him, or I thought I was going to be playing behind him. I didn't know that I was actually going to be playing alongside of him for the most part. But, just a year to learn from him, to grow, to kind of take in, any advice that he could give me. Because at that time, he's All-American. He's probably the best center in the entire country. So, to have a year with a guy like that, for me as a very young freshman was invaluable.
That's huge. And I can just imagine, right, how playing alongside someone like that, or however you felt, whether it was behind maybe to start, could be so huge for your process going up the ranks. And I'm sure that happened, right, so many other times in your career. As you got older, now you're maybe doing that in the reverse way, right? You're the one mentoring all these other people. But thinking about maybe your time at UConn, maybe what went through, what the build up to that national championship in 2004. Obviously, we already discussed getting to UConn, but maybe what happened while you're there that really set up such an amazing career to get you in the first round of the NBA draft?
Just a lot of work, man. It was tough. My freshman year, in the beginning especially, was not fun. There were times I would come home for practice and consider whether I really wanted to be there or not. Maybe I was frustrated because I didn't play well. Maybe I was upset because Ben Gordon was yelling at me, which he had a habit of doing, and I still appreciate that he did it to this day because it made me better. Maybe Calhoun happened to kick me out of practice that day or something, because on any given day, anybody could get kicked out. I don't think there was a person on our team in the 3 years that I was there that didn't get kicked out of a practice at some point for doing something random, maybe not running hard enough. I got kicked out one day because I had sprained my ankle, and we were supposed to be running suicides, and I was basically having to hop because I couldn't run. And I think I ended up finally diving over the end line to try and make the time at the end of it. And basically he just, in not so nice words, told me to get the hell out of his gym. But yeah, it was a struggle at the beginning of the year, both for myself and I think for all of us. I think it took us a little while to really find our feet and really figure out who we were. And I think really the turning point of the beginning of our season was the Georgia Tech game that we had. We played Georgia Tech, who subsequently ended up playing in the national championship game. We played them in the preseason NIT, and they basically just ran us off the court. I think they only beat us by 10 or 12, but the game was not nearly as close as the score would suggest. And I think that was a wake-up call to all of us. I think that really made us realize how much we have to work, how much work we had to do. And, this wasn't going to be handed to us. It wasn't going to be easy. It didn't matter if we had, the best player in the country on our team. It didn't matter if we had one of the best guards in the country on our team. It didn't matter if we had an All-American and Charlie Villanueva coming in the recruiting class on our team. We were still going to have to work. So that was really the time that I think things turned around for us. We started working a little bit harder, started getting better and better every day in practice, and just got on a roll at the end of the year. UConn teams, they have a habit of, when they win the national championship, they tend to be playing really, really good basketball in the Big East tournament. I think, if I'm not mistaken, every time that they have won the national championship, it's been coming off of either winning the Big East tournament or at least making the semifinals. So we're not one of these teams and schools that, maybe we're playing okay going into the tournament and just get on a run. We're playing really, really well going into the tournament every time we do well in the tournament.
So, obviously, right, that must have been an incredible experience. Thank you, right, for going into maybe the ups and downs that may have made it that season. Maybe not everyone maybe focuses on the big up and winning the championship, but obviously so much else had to go into it to make that a reality. And right, getting blown out earlier on in the season and come back and beating that same team, it almost sounds like a movie, like something you'd see in Hollywood. So really, really cool thinking about that, and thinking about maybe after your 3 years at UConn, deciding to declare for the draft. What was that workout process looking like as the 23rd pick, and thinking where you'd see yourself maybe in the league and getting picked up by the Nets with one of your teammates going right before you to the same team? That must have been really cool.
Pre-draft process was a lot. I worked out for every team from 16 to 30 in that draft, and the Nets twice in a span of a month, maybe month and a half. I think I had about 16 workouts with teams, and they were all over the country. I was out in Seattle. I was out in Portland. I had to go to Phoenix. I think I went to at least one of the Texas teams. I was all over the country. I had been working really hard up until that as well. I had actually been out in Chicago for about a month and a half, 2 months or so, I think. working with one of my former coaches from UConn, a guy named Clive Vaughn. He was the assistant coach that recruited me to UConn. He was really the one that kind of saw me first and was the one that brought me and the rest of my recruiting class in. He happened to, offer his services. So he took the time and really helped me get ready for what I was going to be going through. First one didn't go very well. Subsequent ones went much better. To be drafted in the first round is a blessing. To be drafted in general is a blessing. But, to go in the first round, there's only, 30 guys every year that can say that happens. So to not only have that happen, but like you said, to be drafted right behind and to the same team as my former college point guard and roommate, Marcus Williams, was a pretty cool experience, and it made it a lot easier having him there because, we knew each other very well. We were friends for years, and to go through the same experience with somebody that and that you're comfortable with always makes it a lot easier.
Taxing as the pre-draft process was, I would imagine, right, your rookie season in the NBA or the years that followed, right, definitely a lot of travel, a lot of things going on, and just a lot of things that are brand new after going to college for so many years. Now you're in a whole new environment, a professional setting. I mean, you kind of touched on a little bit in terms of what that might have looked like, but what did really, once your rookie season kicked off, I mean, after media day concluded and now they're throwing the ball up and the games are starting, what did that maybe look like?
Well, for me, it was a little bit different because I had a shoulder injury that I picked up when I was in college. I think in either December or early January of my junior year, I tore my labrum, my left shoulder, and continued to play with it through the rest of the season. I knew I needed surgery, but wanted to wait until all of the draft process was over with and summer league as well. I went down to Orlando and played summer league. And then right after summer league finished was when I got the shoulder surgery. So I missed the first couple of months of my rookie season. So, the start to my year was not quite the same as the start to most people's rookie seasons. Mine was spent on the bike for the most part, just watching guys practice, wishing I could be out there. And I don't think it was until maybe late November or December before I was finally on the court. So it took a while. I had to be very patient.
Oh, definitely. And then when it happened early on in December and you had your debut against the 76ers, I mean, I imagine after that, right, things really started picking up in terms of getting into games and seeing what that NBA life was like. New Jersey Nets team, as we said, right before, it was a fun team. Vince Carter, guys like that, which is a team that, a lot of my friends being a New Yorker, maybe I wasn't watching basketball at the time, but a lot of my older friends or coaches, when I told them I was having you on, were like, oh yeah, Josh Boone, like, that's so cool, right? He was one of those guys on back on those teams that they used to watch all the time. I mean, what did maybe the years that followed? How did you see the maybe progression of the team go as you got older and got more accustomed to life in the league?
Honestly, the best years were the first 2 years that we had for us as a team and for myself on a personal level. First year was up and down for me, just like most rookies. There were some games I would play a lot, some games I didn't, some games I'd do really well, some games I didn't do a whole lot. By the end of the year, I was playing a bit more consistently, but still wasn't getting, huge minutes or anything like that. But that was the only year that we made the playoffs. That was nice. We actually made the playoffs as a 6th seed, went in and beat Toronto in the first round, which seeding wise, it was an upset, but we thought going into it that we were the better team. I think we had beaten them. We were either 3-1 or 4-0 against them in the regular season. And we felt as though we were the better team. And, we were actually happy to get the Toronto matchup in that first round. And then happened to run into LeBron's Cavs in the second round. And quite frankly, I think we could have beaten them too, but they had a pretty big game from one or two guys, and a couple of shots just didn't go our way. So we ended up losing to them in 6. The last 2 years, my third year was tough because I got injured towards the beginning of the season. I think it was more than about 15 games or so into the season, maybe not even that much. We were playing the Pacers at home, and I ended up coming down off of a rebound on Roy Hibbert's foot and turned my ankle and ended up with a pretty bad bone bruise in my ankle. I ended up having to miss about a month or so, I think, of the season. And by the time I came back, when guys get injured, especially guys like me who aren't, the top of the top level guys, a lot of times it's tough to get your spot back. It's tough to get back into the rotation when you come back after an extended absence. And, that was what happened with me. I had been starting up until I got injured. And then when I got hurt, obviously I lost my spot. And from then on, once I came back, it was just kind of up and down for me once again. Some days I played, some days I didn't play. And then my last year was pretty similar to that. It was really just up and down. You know, I had 20 rebounds in a game against Atlanta, and within 2 weeks, I didn't have a jersey in my locker for our game against Boston. So, you know, things can change very quickly in the NBA, just as in any professional sports and sports in general. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. And I experienced both of them.
Definitely, that definitely does lend to this perspective of maybe what the NBA landscape is like. And people talk about all the time how basketball is a business and things like that could happen where one week things are going great, the next week not so much. And maybe things get better, things get worse. It all kind of comes full circle at certain times. After maybe the conclusion of that, and then going overseas, I mean, what did that first transit? You have your website called Global Hoop, and you've written about some of your travels overseas. But maybe what were those initial ones? Maybe seeing the culture shock, and now no longer being in the NBA. You had 3 years in college, you had 3 or 4 years in the NBA. Now you're overseas for the first time, and that must have been a huge shock to you.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about it is that it was a major shock. Obviously, my first time out of the country was going to China. And China is pretty much about as far away from our culture as you can get. It's virtually the exact opposite. If you had to pick a place to go where you could say they are the most different from us in all of my travels, I would say it's China. So the good thing is that I kind of got that out of the way, and it was really just a trial by fire for me. The bad thing was that it was very difficult to get used to. You know, I went from MBA, you know, private planes, you know, having access to virtually anything I could want, having a personal assistant to help me with my day-to-day stuff, to being in a country all by myself where no one speaks my language. You know, in the first year that I was there, outside of the American import players and one of our assistant coaches, I think I found a total of 2 people in my entire city that spoke English to me. And that happened to be on the second to last day that I was there. I was in a McDonald's and happened to be standing behind 2 guys from Jersey, of all places. And I was like, man, I've been here for like 6 months, and you guys are the first people I met that spoke English. Where have you been this whole damn time? So it was tough, man. It was tough, you know, going from all that to going to just a pure grind was difficult, but it was good for me because it helped me mature really quickly. You know, I'd be the first to say I was, just as I think a lot of guys are that are in my position, I was pretty immature when I was in the NBA. You know, I was 22, 23, making a lot of money, not having a lot of responsibility, and not really knowing what the outside world was actually like. And I think that can be said about a lot of guys in the NBA. You know, obviously people have different upbringings. Some have been in for longer. Some, you know, have gone through things in their personal life, you know, whereas others haven't. But I don't think that those initial stages in the NBA really prepare you for life outside of the NBA. I think that's something that you have to experience after the fact. And for me, I just happened to experience it at 26 as opposed to, you know, maybe 35 or 36, like some other guys who were luckier to spend more time in the NBA.
That definitely does lead to some perspective about the league. You brought up an interesting point there that I thought was really interesting when you brought up the language barrier and how you only met so many people while you were there that actually spoke English. I mean, you wrote about it a little bit on Global Hoop, but how do you argue with someone that doesn't speak English, doesn't speak your language?
Oh, the incident that you're speaking of, we tried to argue with each other through a translator, and the translator didn't want to argue for us, so we ended up both not the translator. That was an interesting situation. This was my head coach in China my first year. Had a tendency to, every time we lost, blame everything on myself and our other American import. After a while, I kind of just got tired of it. After one of the games, he did the same thing as he always did. And I finally said, look, man, these guys have to take responsibility. You know, this is a team at the end of the day. Yeah, okay, you know, maybe we're the best players on the team. Maybe more is expected of us. But ultimately, games are not won and lost by 2 people. They're won and lost by anybody that steps on that court and anybody that coaches on the sideline. So I'm tired of being blamed for everything, man. I really am. He didn't understand me. So obviously it was translated. He translated translated something back to me. I don't remember what it was then, but whatever it was, I must not have liked the answer because I went back at him, then he came back at me, and then I said something a little bit more forceful. The coach looked at the translator, and the translator wouldn't say it. So the coach started cursing at the translator in Chinese, and I was like, man, what is he saying? Because the translator wouldn't tell me what he was saying, then I got mad, so I started cursing out the translator in English, and all the while, our general manager is actually sitting on the table next to where our translator is, just not saying a word, but he understands everything because he spoke enough English that he could have understood that whole conversation, but he didn't want to say anything. So at the end of that, we got back to the hotel, and there's more to this story that's pretty interesting, but it doesn't involve me. It involves one of our assistant coaches. So we get back to the hotel. I get back to my room. The coach, the general manager, and the translator showed up at my door 20, 30 minutes after we got back. And they were like, look, we're so sorry. That never should have happened. Coach was very apologetic. And from then on, we were cool. It took getting to that point I don't know if that was what needed to happen to gain his respect or what. But from then on, we were good. And then we started winning. And we won like 11 or 12 straight games, something like that. We ended up having the best season that team has ever had in their entire history. So it worked out well at the end of the day. But there were some interesting patches here and there, that's for sure.
Definitely the mentioning patch that we're still talking about all these years later, right? I started laughing hysterically to imagine the back and forth and the translator getting in the middle of all of it. The one thing though I took most from that, and I only know about it somewhat about that environment overseas because of when I played in Greece for a year. That was always something people would talk about, and then something that a lot of listeners might not know about is the pressure put on, especially American imports, which is in general, right? Everyone, if you're coming there, they expect you to dunk everything. They expect you to always be the best you can be. Can you speak a little bit on that in terms of how you've seen that, maybe not just in that stop in China, but maybe in a lot of your other stops as well?
To put it into perspective, my first season in China, I think there was I want to say 15 teams in the league, something like that. Every team except for one had 2 imports. Of all of those imports that started the season, I'm fairly certain that myself, Stephon Marbury, Randolph Morris, and maybe one other guy were the only players to make it the entire season without getting sent home. And some teams changed multiple times. So 4 out of 32 made it through the entire season. That's not very good odds. China is very cutthroat when it comes to their import players. Like you said, when you go to a lot of places, generally a lot of responsibility and in return, a lot of blame is placed on these import players. But specifically in China is about as bad as it gets. They expect you to do everything. My third year, I actually played 3 years with the same team, which virtually never happens over there. And my third season, I was 4 games into the year. I was leading the league in rebounding. I was second in block shots, and our team was 3-1, and they sent me home. That kind of tells you all you need to know about, what they expect. And it's not only what they expect. In China, it's a little different because sometimes they just get tired of it. And that's what happened to me. They just got tired of me. And they had found that they were able to sign a guy that was relatively fresh out of the NBA, but was a bigger name than I was. And in China, at least at that time, they were all about name recognition. They wanted the names so that they could bring in the fans. So they sent me home, brought this guy out, and then less than a month and a half later called me back and said, hey, we don't like him. We want you to come back for more money. But unfortunately, I had injured my knee less than 12 hours before they called me. And because of that, I wasn't able to take the deal. I wish I could have, but I wasn't able to. So really bad timing for me.
I mean, and just imagine just how all that stuff works out, and just obviously with the way the imports are treated, something that maybe as mostly American fans or NBA fans, you don't really think about too often, but it's a real reality that exists overseas. I'm thinking about then after those first 2 stops, you ended up going back overseas, but you did have a quick stop back here in the States with the Iowa Energy and what was then the D League, now the G League. I'm curious. I have a lot of guests on maybe that are from the G League now more recently, but not that many that are from what was still then was the D League. What was that maybe in comparison to what you had just experienced in China? Obviously very different, but then also what you had experienced in the NBA just a few years before that.
I was in the D League 2 different times. The first time was right after I got sent home from China after that third season, or in the middle of that third season, rather. But I only got to play 2 games in the D League then. I injured my knee at the end of the second game of that stint. And then after I came back from my injury, which took a while, it took about a year for me to fully come back. I went to the Philippines. I got sent home from the Philippines after 3 weeks. And the day after, I had 32 points and 21 rebounds in a 20-point win. After that was when I went back to the D-League the second time. And I played there for about a month and a half. And to be honest, I was miserable, man. I was in Iowa, and it's, Des Moines is a very quiet city. And I didn't know anybody there. Everything closes relatively early. I went to a team that pretty much had their rotation kind of stabilized at that point, and it was tough for me to really work my way in. It wasn't until towards the end of the year and into the playoffs where the coach really started trusting me a little bit more. I think he, recognized that I had pretty decent experience. I was in my 7th or 8th year of professional basketball, and most of the guys in the D-League at that time were considerably younger in terms of years of experience. So I think as the season went on and once we got into the playoffs, I think he relied on my experience a little bit more than he had earlier on in the year. But it was a difficult time for me, especially coming off of that stint in the Philippines where, I had dominated that second game and was sent home all because of a poor preseason game that happened a week before that. So it took between that 2-year time frame or so was really tough in the sense that it kind of took away all the joy that I had of playing the game, from being sent home from China to having a major injury, then working my way all the way back, because I didn't know if I was ever going to play again after this injury. My rehab plateaued so much that for several months, I had no idea if I was ever going to be able to get back on the court. To finally make it back from that, go to the Philippines, and then get sent home for nothing that I did wrong, and end up in Iowa where I wasn't playing and I wasn't happy was really tough. Was really tough. And I was just really lucky that after that season got over with and the summer went on, I got a call from a guy named Sam Vincent, who when I was in the NBA, he was the coach of the Charlotte Bobcats for at least one of the years when I was there. And he happened to be an assistant coach my second year over in China. He called me that summer and he said, "Hey, I'm coaching this team in Bahrain. I need an import. I know you're, coming off of an injury. I think you're healthy. Do you want to play for me?" I had no idea where the hell Bahrain was. I'd never even heard of it, quite honestly. It's in the Middle East. It's over by UAE, Saudi Arabia, those countries. And I said, yeah, sure, why not? I got no other choice at this point. I might as well take this chance. And it was the best thing I could have done for my career. It was an amazing experience. I loved my teammates. I loved playing for that organization. I loved playing for Sam. I really respected him. And, we developed a nice friendship over the years as well. And it was really what I needed to kind of bring me back to the game of basketball, to bring that love back. I had so much fun playing that season that I was like, okay, this is, I'm back to normal now.
I was so happy to hear the end of that answer. I was waiting for it. I was really hoping it wouldn't have, it wasn't going to be much far along down the story. And it happened right after that original stint back in 2013, 14, 15, that you ended up finding that passion for the game again. It's obviously uplifting to hear that, because at the beginning I was like, oh, that's the worst thing you could ever hear, someone losing the passion for basketball. I can't imagine ever walking onto a court and not wanting to take a jump shot or not loving the sound of a ball bouncing. So I'm really happy that it ended up coming back full circle and you ended up finding that passion again. There were so many other stints after that. What kind of helped that passion stick after that stint in Bahrain? What else kind of maybe kept it going for you in loving the game in all those stops that followed?
Because I just loved it in general, man. Having the type of career that I have, you can't do what I've done if you don't really love the game of basketball. And it's kind of funny because when I was in the NBA, I remember sitting down with our team president, Rod Thorne, and we had a conversation. And what he told me was that there was a question in the NBA as to whether I actually loved to play the game of basketball or not. And that is one of those things that is really tough to come back from in terms of stigmas in the NBA. I think after 15 years of doing what I've done, of going what I have gone through in my career, the injuries, the setbacks, being sent home, released from multiple teams and still coming back every year, I don't think there's any question anymore that I love this game, and I hope that anybody who may have had that question about me back when I was in the NBA has seen what I've done and said, okay, maybe maybe we were wrong. Maybe he does actually love this game, because I do. That's the only reason I'm still doing it.
That's that's one of the reasons why you're coming on a podcast of a 21-year-old and helping out and sharing that passion for the game, because you love the basketball and you love talking about it. So thank you, number one, for coming on the show, but also number two, right, for having that passion that we all have. And my last question is one that I've been formulating recently. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Disney Plus series Big Shot with John Stamos, who's a basketball coach. The basic premise of the show is that he has to coach a girls' high school team after being a national championship winning coach, because of some things he's done off the court, and he ends up, quote unquote, losing the game in that sense. My question to you is, if for some reason you weren't able to play anymore, or for some reason the basketball was taken away from you, what other passions would you dive into that you still love wholeheartedly?
Obviously, I'm getting older. When I say older, I'm getting real old in terms of basketball numbers. So in the next few years, I gotta transition out of playing anyway. Granted, I'm still able to perform at a very high level, and as long as my body holds up, I can probably play for a few more years. But beyond that, I have to do something else. And what I'm really looking into is either coaching or front office work, honestly. When I was playing when I was younger, and when I say younger, I mean like 5-6 years ago, something like that, I don't think I ever really wanted to be a coach at that point. I think going through what I had gone through as a player, I didn't necessarily want to have to go through those same things after I finished playing when I didn't have to go through them. And as a coach, you have to go through a lot of similar things that you do as a player, especially when you're coaching overseas. But the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that, I'm very good at what I do. And I have no problem saying it. I have been one of the best people in the world at what I do for a very long time. And I think for me to just all out leave the game of basketball and not be able to, or not be willing to give back and share some of the knowledge that I have gained over these last 15 years of playing professionally, I think would be a travesty. So I think it only makes sense for me to either go into coaching, which I think I would be very good at, or to go into the management side and deal with scouting, eventually maybe become a general manager. I think that would really be my ultimate goal, would be to become a GM of a team somewhere, whether it's in the NBA or whether it's overseas. It's something that I would really love to do. And if coaching was the way to get me there, to get my foot into the door, then I would love to do that as well.
I love it, and maybe thinking about just how basketball can be something outside of playing, and how maybe that passion can evolve into something that's a lifetime thing. So thank you for sharing that, because I'm meeting each other on LinkedIn. I saw on your LinkedIn how you had those other passions, like coaching, like management, like broadcasting, like auto racing, and all stuff like that. I thought that was so cool. And think about how there's more than the playing side of things. There's so much more to a person, to everyone's story, and that's kind of why I do the show. You mentioned all these passions on the basketball side of things, and the physical side of things in the NBA, whether it's coaching or managing or something like that. But I do know that you have that passion of esports, and it's something, right, I haven't had too many guests on that maybe people discuss that they're into it, that esports is the future, but no one really knows why. I mean, what's the value or the true value that you see in esports, and why you think it's going to keep on growing?
Esports is interesting because many people wouldn't consider it a sport. Obviously there are people that, maybe are involved in these. You wouldn't look at them and say, okay, they're an athlete. But, mentally and in certain ways physically, these kids are athletes. A lot of them are practicing for 8 to 10 hours a day. They're working really hard on their craft, and it is exhausting both physically and mentally for them. So to me, they are athletes. And to anyone that doesn't say it's a sport and doesn't think that it has fan support, all you have to do is look at some of these major tournaments. Up until obviously the pandemic happened, these places are packing arenas. I'm talking 40, 50, 60,000 people are going to watch some of these top level esports events, and millions more are streaming it. So to me, that seems like it has legs. That seems like it has longevity. Video games are not going anywhere anytime soon. They've been around for 50 years now, 40, 50 years, somewhere around there. And they just keep getting better and better and keep gaining more and more interest.
So where do you see your role being in all that? I mean, you're as you're retiring from basketball, maybe you might be older than most of these esports players. What role do you see yourself in ingratiating yourself into that esports community?
Oh, no, I couldn't be a professional esports player, man. I'm good at some of these games. I'm not nearly good enough to be a pro. Ultimately, as I said, from the basketball standpoint, if it was an ideal world for me, I would be a general manager of an NBA team or an overseas team. If it was in esports, it would be the same role. I've seen and visited a couple of esports teams, and I've got a friend who used to play for the Knicks named Jared Jeffries, and he actually did pretty much what I would love to do. He started working in the NBA after his playing career. He became an assistant general manager. And from there, he actually became the GM of a very high-level esports team and essentially ran the esports team as if it were a professional sports team like an NBA team. And I think it worked out really well for them. And I think it set up a good template for a lot of the other esports teams out there. And I would love to have the chance to do something similar with a team. Whether that could happen or not, who knows? But that would certainly be a goal and maybe a dream of mine someday.
So, Josh, I really want to thank you for coming on and sharing all this with us, both your time in the NBA, your time overseas, and maybe the funny stories that came out of there, and also some of the other ones that maybe people don't realize as much. And then also maybe what you plan to do after you retire from playing, but still have so much time left to still live this basketball life. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, man, of course. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thanks for listening to Gen Z Hoops. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all major social media platforms at Gen Z Hoops. You can tune in and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and every other podcast platform on the planet. Get ready for the next episode.